Well, Denis and Laurence, as I've been talking to various of our colleagues around the world, a number of people raise the question of what will happen with incentives, R&D, patents, whatever, in a BEPS 2.0 world. And both of your countries have such incentives. Denis, I'm curious, what are people talking about in Australia?
Well, thanks, Rodney. I think in Australia, we're really focused, I suppose, on our R&D incentive. Now, our R&D incentive is it's a non-refundable credit. So I suppose when you look at the Pillar 2 blueprints, that is one that might be more in the crosshairs of the arrangements as opposed to some of the other, say, refundable tax offsets or cash credits. However, Australia is quite a high tax jurisdiction. Our headline tax rate for entities which were within scope of Pillar 2 is 30%. And so the rate at which the R&D offset cuts in is generally at such a rate that it would not cause most Australian multinationals to fall below the effective tax rates that are going to cause issues for Pillar 2. So I think once we understand how the rules work in Australia and the high tax rate in Australia, we're generally finding that there shouldn't be a material impact on multinationals in Australia from the R&D offsets. Likewise, we do have a new patent box regime which was announced by the federal government in our budget this year. It's slated to begin operation on the 1st of July 2022. The rate there is 17%. So once again, quite carefully chosen in a Pillar 2 world to likely not cause too many problems for Australian taxpayers going below the effective tax rate.
That's really interesting, Denis. So it sounds like the way Australia is thinking about this, perhaps the impact on Australian level incentives maybe not so significant. Of course, time will tell. So what does that mean that Australian multinationals are then focused on in this area? Is it looking outside the country?
Correct, Rodney. I think it's largely us looking outbound now into the Asia-Pacific region where there are a multitude of different types of incentives. Some of them are R&D incentives, some are tax holidays. And so one of the most critical considerations for us is how do they impact existing tax structuring? So are there long-term tax holidays, for example, which may be unwound in places like Malaysia or Singapore, where there are tax holidays that people have baked into their tax models? And would they be undone by Pillar 2? Now, I think for most Australian taxpayers, it might be a case of seeing top-up tax in Australia in any case. But it's also worth noting in that context, we have quite a robust CFC regime, Rodney. So a number of these considerations have already been considered as part of our CFC modelling as well.
Interesting. Well, and Laurence, how does that compare or contrast with what people are saying in France?
Actually, it's pretty similar to the Australian case because as in Australia and France, we have two big types of incentive. One is the R&D credit, which should not really be impacted by the Pillar 2 rules because our credit is a refundable credit, so it's treated as subsidy under IFRS or US GAAP, and so not impacted by the Pillar 2 rules. The other incentive, it's the IP box regime, the new IP box regime, which has been deeply modified, reformed as from 2020. This IP box allows a taxation of only 10% on the income from the IPs. But because of the new carve-out rules, of course, we'll see how it comes, but the carve-out rules which should be enacted with the Pillar 2 normally should allow the IP box to stay out to stay out of the of impact by Pillar 2. Also because France has a pretty high tax rate, which should be 25% in 2022. The blended rate makes that normally the effective tax rate should stay higher than 15% for most of the groups.
So interesting. So again, I guess the thinking that maybe that system continues post BEPS 2.0 because of the combination of the relatively high tax rate and the nexus rule. So then are people in France following the BEPS 2.0 changes in this area, or are people relatively relaxed at this stage?
No, actually, it's like Denis said, actually, for the French rules, most of people believe that normally they should not be impacted. But of course, for the beneficial regime outside of France, they will have to monitor their effective tax rate there in order to not be cogged by the Pillar 2 rules. And again, as in Australia, we also have our own CFC, anti-hybrid, and so on. Nevertheless, I think there is still some work to be done, homework to be done by the MNEs in order to monitor the effect of Pillar 2, especially outside of France.
Interesting. So this continues to be an issue that people are talking about. Here, both Australia and France have rules in the area that are designed to incentivize people. But maybe Pillar 2 will not be too much of an impact. We'll just have to wait and see what the rules actually mean and what work multinationals need to do to sort of think about those in the context of their operations in country. Well, Laurence, Denis, thank you very much for your time today. Fascinating discussion.